I'm Jane.
I'm Cathy Mudge, at Cathy Mudge on Twitter, and I'm a member of Protect and Teach.
And I'm Jenny, and I'm also just a member of Protect and Teach.
And I'm Bex,
And this is
Insightful Sisters.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. We've got a really interesting episode ahead. We have got Cathy and Jenny here from Protect and Teach. They're going to talk to us about their work with C of E schools and around safeguarding of children. Protect and Teach try to protect children during their school years from indoctrination, especially around gender topics in school. Cathy, Jenny, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Okay, so first of all, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves and just when did you first become aware of the gender debate and issues around transgender identities in schools?
I was definitely quite late. I was very much in my own little bubble of young kids and stuff until probably 2023 before I really became aware of it. So it was a pretty quick jump from becoming aware of it to becoming very, very concerned about it, particularly because my kids are right at that age that it's happening in school. I think for me, it was the teenage girls. When I realized that it was happening to teenage girls, I had a mastectomy for the BRCA gene back at the start of 22 and didn't realize at that time that, the surgeon was doing it to teenagers as well. But it just absolutely blows my mind that they can be saying that this operation changes somebody's sex. It's so offensive and it's so damaging. So,
Yes, I think I was maybe the end of 23, 22. I think I've been hearing about, I'm a midwife. So the fact that I remember people saying to me, oh, and now there's an operation where they turn a penis inside out and a man is now a woman and they can do the reverse and a woman can become a man. And I remember hearing that and I remember thinking, all right. And I was busy. I sort of went over my head and then it came back and I thought, hang on a minute. They what? They do what? And I started looking it up and I think it was the fact, I'm sure you're the same, Jenny. It was the acceptance that was the big thing. They thought, well, that's just what they do now. It's really great. It's modern. And I started looking into it and I felt I was alone, actually. A lot of people I work with in the medical profession never heard of it. I mean, this is Devon, so it's to be expected. I'm sure if you're in a London hospital, it'd be different. So a lot of people hadn't heard of it at all. And I would say things to them like, what they're doing, they're sort of saying about women being men. And because I was a midwife, they were starting to change the language at people having babies. And of course, the real trigger for me was when they said chest feeding, because as a midwife, I can tell you now that my back and my knees, when you're trying to help a woman breastfeed, and they're really keen to breastfeed, and the baby is just not going to go on without a fight, and you're there trying to relax, trying to like relax the mum, and you really, really hurt. And the worst thing you could do is say, "Oh God, this is hurting my back. We have to stop." You have to say, "No, it'll be fine. The baby will get on in a minute. It's just a bit sleepy. We just need to wait here." And so the thought that I would be kneeling down in front of a bloke trying to teach him how to blimmin' well chest feed his baby, I think that was what peaked it for me. And I blew a fairly major gasket. And I went to see Kelly J in Cardiff. And I just turned up in Cardiff. I didn't know where we were going. It was a big rugby match. And it was really hard to find the girls. And I've went there and then I spoke about, breastfeeding as a midwife and these women getting their breasts cut off. And it sort of snowballed from there. I think I must have met you, Jenny, then in 23, because I just sort of heard about the Standing for Women. And then we had a locals meeting, didn't we?
yeah, exactly.
What brought you to Protect and Teach?
At the Let Women Speak event in Exeter, Cathy had been digging up some stuff on our local trans charity, Intercom Trust, and what she shared with us there sort of led us to doing a research project on the schools in Devon to see where they were at with their policies and stuff. And that's how we formed, really.
Yeah, we were so shocked about it because my son's left school now. Jenna's is still at school, and I was just amazed to know that an LGBTQ group was going in during lunch times, meeting children, and there was no sort of real evidence of it on the school site. It was not really that promoted. We found some of it in the social media, didn't we, Jenny? So we'd maybe find a few sort of messages, a few photos and stuff like that, or a parent would contact us because people started to hear that we were looking at schools. So parents came and told us about their particular school. So that helped.
So you met a Let Women Speak, and how quickly did you sort of come up with the idea of, right, okay, we need to start something, we need to start Protect and Teach? Was that a slow road, or were you sort of instantly, right, let's get to work?
Well, I think our thing is we do it fast, don't we, Jenny?
Yeah.
And I think that's the we don't have a committee meeting and sit down and say, right, what should we do? What's the best way to do it? We just do it. And that's what happened, wasn't it? And we have friends. So we have a friend in Dorset, again with the Let Women Speak, and we had a friend in Cornwall and another friend again in the Exeter area. So they said that they could cover their areas. And Jenny and I started with Devon, and then we helped with Cornwall, didn't we?
Well, we were all in a WhatsApp group with a man that was working up in Bristol who had done a sort of small scale version of what we ended up doing in Devon, where he just looked at every school policy to see, who was saying that it was bullying to misgender another pupil or who was encouraging binder use and stuff like that. And we just sort of took it to a much bigger scale with covering the whole area, and we were gobsmacked at what we found. There's so many schools just not prioritising safeguarding at all.
We'd start looking at a school policy. It took us a while to get the hang of it. Once you've done a few, I mean, Jenny and I can whiz through them. We get someone phones us, don't they? And they say, I'm not sure about my school. And either me or Jenny, within about 5 minutes, was come back to them and say, right, this is what we found. Because obviously I think we did about 700 or something plus in the end. By the time you've done that number of schools, you're actually quite fast. But again, we decided to do it on an Excel spreadsheet. We possibly initially decided to do too much because we were taking down the headmaster, weren't we? The email address, the safeguarding leads. So our first few schools were so intensive. And we actually thought, well, no, we can come back and find out who the headmaster is if we need to. So we just basically pulled their policies up. And we did something where we said they'd been stonewalled, didn't we, Jenny?
Yeah, there's a lot of copy and pasting going on from, I think it's sort of gendered intelligence as possibly the route for a lot of these policies.
So you produced a guide on safeguarding of children in schools and colleges. I was delighted you had colleges in there because that's my work background, and they do often get forgotten. And a lot of kids come to college at 16 because they didn't fit in at school, and they are the very kids that a lot of this is aimed at. So tell us a bit about that guide. What are the key messages in that guide?
Yeah, so there's so many different angles where this ideology just obliterates safeguarding in schools. So we look at all the different ways that it is, we think, breaking the laws that exist out there and the statutory guidance that exists, including obviously the Education Act, keeping children safe in education, working together to safeguard children, Equality Act. So many bits of legislation are there in theory to protect kids, but they're just being ignored at the moment. So one of the things we look at, obviously, is the teaching of this ideology as if it was fact. The inclusion of trans teachers, we think, and adults is a big issue because obviously there's quite a lot of policies and literature that basically compels children to go along with the desired pronouns and stuff of teachers. And we think that that is one of the most serious sort of gaslighting, emotional abuse of kids that schools should be playing no part in whatsoever. So we go into that in quite some detail and also look at the necessity for single sex spaces and how it is important for children and adults to have privacy from the opposite sex, and how that, especially in schools, at such a vulnerable time of kids' lives, they need that separation.
We just wanted a guide that we could give schools. So we send it to schools at parents' requests, usually because they have got to the stage where they don't really want to do too much in their name. We've got a couple, we've got one mum who's banned from her school grounds for challenging this. And we've got another father who was told that he will be banned if he doesn't stop. And he said he feels he's just been totally silenced now. He can't say anything at the school. So we take over. So we send it from Protect and Teach. So it basically clarifies, because I think a lot of people have this idea of this sort of fey gay boy who's quite sweet and innocuous, coming into women's spaces who'll get beaten up in the men's toilets. So women, you know, being the carers, have to care for them. And again, girls, I think as well, are being made to be nice, be kind. And our booklet challenges that and says, you know, that you should be questioning exactly what the man is thinking when he is changing his dress code. Really, that's basically all he's doing, and changing his pronouns. You're making children lie, and also their cognitive development. This is where kids sort out the world. So they sort out from a very young age, as soon as they see things, what's a dog, what's a cat, what's a tree, what they can eat, what they can't eat, what's a poisonous berry. You're basically messing around with them by saying, no, that is not a man, that is a woman. And we've got school policies where they will be disciplined for not using pronouns, saying about the importance of how they use pronouns. And it says both the child and the teacher will be disciplined. We've got parents who've called us where their child had been made to leave a classroom because they misgendered or questioned the teacher on the gender issue and said, I don't believe it, or my mum doesn't believe that people can change sex, and they are made to leave the classroom like a naughty child, while the rest of the class obviously keeps its head down and does what it's told. I mean, I think, Jenny, you were saying about teenage girls, and I think the big thing for me is it makes girls think that they're just not important, that they can be replaced by a boy. There's nothing special about being a girl. There's nothing special about being safe as a girl. There's nothing, because we've got loads of stuff. We're going more now because we normally specialise in PHSE, really, don't we, Jenny? But we're now drifting into sex education because they're mixing the two up. And so they're adding sex education into the PHSE. We have lists for like a junior school of the names of things that, I mean, I wouldn't even say it on your program because it's so awful as a word, and they're expecting 9-year-olds to know it.
I think you should actually.
Well, something like smegma.
Yeah.
Do you know what smegma is?
I used to watch Red Dwarf. Of course I know.
Well, it's the sort of thing you really want a 9-year-old to know what that is and what that means.
I know. Yeah.
And that's on a list of how they should know what it is. They should know what it is and then be able to discuss it the year after.
Why do you need to discuss that?
Yeah, things like masturbation, obviously the gender ideology, so non-binary, all the different genders. I mean, we have some schools that list about 10 different genders. It's just ridiculous. So girls are being told, I focus on girls obviously because I'm a woman, and the person who's most likely to be in trouble is going to be a girl if she goes with a man and she's told that that's okay, he's a woman. You know, she goes in a toilet and there's a man in there in a dress, and all her school has told her, that's okay, they're a woman. They're a woman inside, they're going to be just like you. Well, they're actually not.
Do you think it comes from a place of kindness, or do you think there's something sinister at play here?
I think most teachers are massively overwhelmed with, all the various things coming down from the academy trusts and the local councils and the government, and they are just doing their best and doing what they think is right. And they've just been lied to about what is right. And we've seen how so many institutions have been captured in this way because people just aren't giving it the thought that they should. They're just going along with it because they think it's the next gay rights movement, or, they just want to be good people. I do think the majority of people that are going along with it just haven't really thought about it properly. But I think that excuse is limited because you can't plead ignorance for much longer. There's been enough stories about the damage done by puberty blockers and early transition and detransitioners and all the rest of it. So I think we just need to get the information out there and people must change their minds.
Yeah, you see, I think there's also activist teachers. And I think you can tell in a school the minute you've got one or two teachers who are an activist in there. Because I think Jenny feels that her school's quite good at the moment. We've actually met the headmistress there. So we sometimes go to schools and meet them if they'll talk to us. And I've been to a couple of schools as well. But you can almost feel they drive it, and I think they drive it at such a level that nobody in the staff room is going to stand up and say anything. The last thing they want is to be the one who's picked out as the transphobe by saying, look, I don't agree with this. We also work in councils, don't we, Jenny? And we've had one of our councils where the social work department wanted to discuss this, and the man said to the female social workers there, I don't believe that people can change sex. Well, three of them had the vapors. Two of them said they couldn't be in the same room as him anymore and had to leave the room. He was disciplined and he had to be retrained in LGBTQ. So I reckon that's the sort of thing that happens in schools. So unless you've got a very strong headmistress with a good deputy head who's sort of like, no, we're not going there. So they just basically turn it down. It's Pride Week. Okay, fine, we'll talk about it in assembly and then that's it, we'll leave it. But the activists will ensure that everything happens. We did FOIs on schools on what they were doing in Pride Week last year. And with one school, we did 3 years worth. And with one school, it's really quite sad because they started off where they just held up the pride flag. They were so proud. They held up the pride flag in year one. In year two, they had the pride flag. They had a special assembly. They had art classes for it. And they had a special speaker coming in. Year three, they had a picnic, rainbow laces, balloons, badges, badge making. It just was massive by year three.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed and I thought was really interesting is you've produced your own glossary of terms, and it's really direct is the word I was thinking of when I read it, because you explain in detail what an autogynephile is, for example. How's that been received?
Um, it's been received really well by parents, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've certainly had no negative comments.
No, I think the schools we've sent it to who've got an autogynephile in their teaching staff, they haven't come back to us yet. We feel that people just don't know. They just do not understand. There's just this womanly feeling inside a man, and that's all there is to it. And the thing is, what we want to do is we want to educate people because we always feel once you're peaked, there's no going back. Once you've seen it, you see the behaviour differently. We've got a teacher locally to us, haven't we, Jenny? We've been writing to the school. They're ignoring it totally. He's not just dressed as a woman. He's sort of dressed like in kinky way, hasn't he? Got like kinky white boots and everything, and then like a Laura Ashley dress. He's got this look about him that's not just a man who wants to grow his hairs long and paint his nails. Do you know what I mean? There's so much more going on with that. And me and Jenny now know when we see him, we know what game he's playing. And no, all the other teachers do not, and the children do not. We know that two boys have been disciplined recently for misgendering him. And we know that he wears a t-shirt saying save trans students as well in the school. It's just ridiculous. And it has to end, but we have to expose it. And that's the only way to do it is to expose it. Parents have no idea. Unless you saw him at pickup, and you possibly wouldn't if your child was older. You know how children get, don't they? They don't want you to go in, after nursery. I think in nursery you go in, don't you, to pick them up. And then after that, they're very much like, oh, mum, don't let them see me. You can see me. Yeah. So you're not going to get a chance to see him. And now parents' evenings, I don't know if you're finding this yourselves, are on Zoom. It seems to be since COVID. they sort of stuck with the Zoom parent-teacher meeting. That's great, isn't it? And perfect barrier, so you don't really get into the school to have a look around.
Yeah, I think it's something Caroline Fisk, I'm sure, has mentioned it at some point. This increasing reliance on ed tech, or the ed tech sector. These organizations just pumping out PDFs and slides, and schools just buying it rather than doing their own lesson plans.
And to me, that would take such a lot of joy out of being a teacher, which is quite a creative thing.
Yeah, we had a good talk from Emma, didn't we? Emma talked on our Protect and Teach Day. And Emma is from the Children for Transitioners. And she said the average age of school teachers is plummeting because older teachers are retiring early, like it's happening en masse in the NHS as well. Oh, people like me, I mean, I took early retirement. You reach a stage where you think, when can I leave? You can't get your state pension, but you think, at what stage do you think I can give up this work? And so the older teachers are going, and they're being replaced by 20 somethings, heavily indoctrinated. You're looking at a decade of indoctrination in all this gender stuff. And a lot of them come from university and teach first. And so she said basically they're not interested in being teachers. They've been told it's a career step. So they're in law, medicine, that sort of thing. So they're only planning to be in the school for 2 or 3 years. In return, they get support for doing a dissertation. So that's going to be their concentration. So they are going to just love this sort of slides that we're getting. Like, for example, Jigsaw, PHSE, they're going to be able to do their lesson, put those slides up. All the teachers' notes are there. There's no challenge or anything like that. And again, as she said, they're only there for that short period of time. So you don't, and they'll often be going, mid-term because the jobs come up. They've done their X amount of time. So they've got young people on really low salaries. And the other thing we found out is that they get paid an extra £2,000 a year for promoting LGBTQ in the classes.
What?
So
Say that
becoming the lead
really?
LGBTQ lead. Yeah, they get an extra £2,000 for that.
Is
Blimey.
that the Rainbow Award?
The Rainbow Award, yeah. So that, but they'll also become the lead person for it, won't they? So they'll set up the clubs,
Wow.
make sure the days go really well. And so if you're on a low salary from university in your 20s,
Yeah,
it's a lot of money, £2,000.
yeah,
That's
it
your
is.
summer holiday, isn't it?
Yeah. You mentioned Jigsaw there. So I know you did a bit of you researched and looked at Jigsaw. Do you want to tell us a bit about Jigsaw?
Yeah, we've got 101 groups going into schools, and Jigsaw's one of them.
101.
And we started Jigsaw 101. Yeah, we got up to 100. I was like, well, I've got 100. And then got another one added to it. So Jigsaw we took on because we've got so many complaints from parents. And the biggest complaint is that children come home and say stuff to their parents about what they've learned. And then it's really hard to find out exactly what's gone on.
Yeah, so when we were doing our research, we realised a lot of it was found in the PHSE policies. You'd find like a roadmap or a link to a provider. And I don't know why schools aren't providing their own PHSE content, but it seems that no schools do. So they all seem to use an external provider for PHSE, and one of the biggest providers is Jigsaw. It seems to be used by most C of E schools, and quite a lot of other ones as well. And they were certainly a few years ago, the slides that we've been able to access are teaching gender ideology as fact. It's very hard to actually access what the kids are being shown in classrooms, though. Schools will say it's to do with copyright or something, but they won't give you the actual intellectual property, that's the word.
Yeah, so what they do is if a parent asks, they'll be given a summary of the lesson. So it'll say things like, we teach the children all about the differences between people. So that's really vague, isn't it? Then the slides, they give so the parents can go and see the slides. So they're sat down in front of a screen with a teacher on either side, one of them pressing the button of selected slides. It's not the entire presentation. They never see the teacher's notes, and that's the big thing we found when we actually had a whistleblower give us that with the teacher's notes in. The teacher's notes are the really worrying thing. The slide itself is really innocuous. We must accept everybody with a jigsaw. But then when you say, right now, we want to talk to the children about the trans women and why these trans women have such a bad time. Why are they being bullied? What could be done to make them feel better? And then, you have a charter, be nice, be kind, be accepting. And right at the bottom, I think the bottom one in the charter is something like we keep confidence or something. I thought that sounds like keeping secrets to me.
We've sort of spoken a little bit there about C of E schools in particular, and I know that you've done a sort of special level of research into them. And on your website, you can see the sort of discourse and the conversations that you've been having with them back and forth. I suppose a good place to start would be, could you tell us what Flourishing for All is and what it is about this policy that you find so concerning?
Yeah, so Flourishing for All is the replacement for a policy called Valuing All God's Children, which was a policy basically written with Stonewall. It was labeled as anti-bullying, but what it actually is coercion to go along with this ideology, really. It's a massive document. It's so boring. But it's absolutely full of things like a requirement to make sure that trans adults in the school community are not exposed to harmful debates about the place or care of trans people in society. Which obviously means things like people who say, well, maybe we shouldn't be giving children puberty blockers. So we were aware of valuing all God's children and the fact that they were saying for ages, we're removing that, we're replacing it. So we sort of already had it on our radar to really check what it was in Flourishing for All. Valuing all God's children was flagged up as the reason. There was a story a little while ago about some little girls that were traumatized in their primary school because they had been told that their classmate was a little girl and he was actually a little boy. And they'd been told this from the age of about 5. They were really close friends. And when they found out he was a little boy, they were having nightmares. They didn't want to go to the toilet. They, they were crying. I didn't want to hold hands with a boy. I thought I was holding hands with a girl and stuff. It was so cruel. And it was valuing all God's children. And Flourishing for All is just the same but worse.
Gosh, I remember that story and being so shocked by it that, I mean, the dishonesty towards children from teachers and from school staff when those children are in your care was shocking. Is Flourishing for All changed by name only, or were there any other sort of significant changes from valuing all God's children?
They made it about 10 times longer, a lot of padding, and it may just be a feeling because I can't think of any exact quotes that make me feel this way, but I do think it puts extra emphasis on accepting teachers that are trans. It goes on about the adults in the school community an awful lot more than valuing all God's children did, which was far more about socially transitioning young children. I feel like Flourishing for All is more about the teachers, which, as we've said, is a major concern.
It's growing. The numbers are growing. The reports we're getting, and I'm again, the men start as a teacher, and then the next year they come back as a woman after a term break. And I almost think I do believe that they're almost like choosing the job, and they're not coming out as to what they want to be until they've got their feet under the table, and then that's it. You can't get rid of them. Then they become sort of like, well, the holy people, don't they? Really, the untouchables within the school. I mean, we did try really hard. I gate crashed one of their world conferences on education, the Church of England, and asked them a question before I was thrown out about what they were trying to do and how awful it was. We wrote to all the bishops in the house. We actually got them hand delivered letters saying about our concerns because our big issue is we can email, but we never know whether the email gets past the secretary to the people. We've spoken to Mr. Genders, would you believe it? Loads of times he's in charge of the teaching about our concerns, and they just keep dismissing them. And considering the state they're in after the recent, handling of the sex abuse that led to Archbishop having to resign, Welby having to resign, they're not in a strong position at all to be telling us that what they're doing is right. It's 1 million children you see in the Church of England, and some of the worst scores that we had for policies, chest binders in junior school was a Church of England school. Sharing changing rooms and children choosing the change room they wanted, Church of England school. Um, so it was really, really more shocking, I think. I mean, I would say when we did the whole thing, we just used to spend the day, we'd phone each other up and we would say, oh gosh, you'll never guess, look what I found. And you post it, and then someone else would come back. You think, yeah, yours is worse. And with what you'd found in the policy. And again, I think because it is the Church of England, people just don't realise just how bad it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's unexpected, the fact that it's so significantly worse.
Yeah, I mean, we do give them a really balanced argument in the letters we write. Some of our letter writers, which I have to say isn't me, it's not my great strength, they're really challenging them. That if they'd read them, they should be looking at what we're picking out. We're not just saying we hate this. We're actually specifying why it's wrong, why they're breaking KICSI or the Education Act, or what this will mean to a child, and really pointing it out, and each time they're ignoring it. So we're basically auditing it at the moment, aren't we, Jenny? I would say they're not changing it. We're telling them where it's going wrong, and they're ignoring it. We're auditing it again. Our little audit trail of the Church of England. So we have this weight, because we had the weight because of Welby retiring. So now they said, well, we won't be able to consider this anyway until we have a new person in place. So we wait that with bated breath.
Yeah, I mean, it's essential work that you're doing, effectively keeping this audit trail, and it's all really clear to see on your website. You can see the sort of history and the discussions that have been happening. That's very important, because when this does tumble down, probably one of the first things that they'll do is deny having known that there were issues. I find it really interesting, the safeguarding point that you made as well, that there's more of a focus towards teachers than students, and you're doing all of this work to point out the potential harms to children. And it does seem that we've sort of reframed safeguarding and protecting children as being something nasty that right-wing people and, transphobes focus on. And only the sort of worthy trans people should be protected.
Yeah, it's created that sacred caste of men again, which we know is a dangerous thing to do, because it attracts then the predators, doesn't it?
Oh,
Um,
well, you would think the church had learnt this
you would
lesson.
think so, but they are just going down the same route again, and it's exactly the same problem. By making it so that you can't scrutinize these men, then
Mhm.
you are inviting predators into schools.
So you've made some suggestions on your site as well about how things could change, and improvements that they could make to sort of start setting things on the right tracks. What do you think they should prioritize if they listened to you and took your advice? What do you think the first and most important changes to make would be?
Personally, I think Flourishing for All just needs to go. It's really easy to write an anti-bullying policy that applies to everybody, because we know all kids are going to get picked on, in a document like Flourishing for All, where they do it by protected characteristics. There's no attention paid to the ginger kids or the kids with glasses or braces or the kids that are having a hard time at home. It's it's all about the identity politics of it. So I think they need to start again, but with a completely fresh outlook on what they're actually trying to achieve. If they are trying to achieve an anti-bullying policy, they're going about it completely the wrong way.
That's a really interesting point that you raised there that I hadn't really thought about. I suppose these lobby groups, they sort of get an awful lot of funding, get an awful lot of attention, and they produce a lot of resources. And there's sort of, like you say, places get stonewalled. But a lot of the things that children are most likely to be bullied about are not protected characteristics. And so you feel that this doesn't sort of adequately address those issues at all.
It doesn't even touch on them so far. So they plan to, at some point in the future, apparently release further documents to go with Flourishing for All about race and sex and possibly some kind of like autism, SEN kind of anti-bullying. But yeah, it really doesn't go into what's actually causing bullying. And, it's not the protected characteristic a child has. It's much more complicated than that. So yeah, it does nothing to address actual bullying.
And again, it should be just part of a school policy. You just have a policy on bullying. If a child's being bullied, what happens? Who does what? Who disciplines? What the discipline will be? Whether you can get the children to talk to each other or whatever, and how you handle it. It's just so easy. And like you say, they've expanded it, haven't they, Jenny? I mean, I have to say, quite a few of our team took a bullet on reading that one. And we had to reread it again when Welby left, and we'd written to the bishops, I think, and we said, right, we're gonna do another letter to them, and they were like, we've got to read it again. Like, yeah, I'm sorry, guys, you need to read it again, and we're going to go at it from a different angle. Again, it's just chipping away all of this stuff, and if no one's challenging it, all of these things go through and nobody's saying, hang on a minute, and we are challenging it. And whether I know at the moment they're not doing anything about it, but they do know that there are people keeping an eye on it, which is the main thing, I think. Because our concern is, I mean, like you say, the money is amazing what they're paying. I mean, we're talking about companies paying, like BBC Children in Need, for example, over 5 years has given 1.8 million to trans your children. That's what they're doing to push transgender ideology in school. Um, and that's just a massive amount of money. How can we compete with that? We obviously all volunteers, most of us are in this area, aren't we? Of others you've interviewed. And you're up against those sums of money, those huge sums of money. Of course they, can get in. I think it's embarrassing. Since we've been doing it, we've noticed definitely that the social media has dropped off, hasn't it, Jenny? When we started doing this, we could just pull out loads of stuff. I really wish we'd done a lot more screenshots, because now as soon as we write to them, the place is like wiped clean, isn't it? For all fingerprints are removed of any rainbows. So it's much harder for us to find the information. But it's good because it's like they know they're doing wrong. Because otherwise you would have it in your parents' newspaper, you'd have it splurged all over your website. Look at what we're doing. And they're not doing that because part of them knows that that's not right, the way that they're pushing it. I mean, this month now, I mean, we've seen all the stuff coming through, all the publicity that's being released, isn't it, by parents, what various schools are up to. So I think that once upon a time, that, a couple of years ago, that would have been, oh, wow, look at what we're doing. Aren't you great? Whereas now, they're not. They're thinking twice about it, which is what I want them to do. Just think about it. Think about what you're doing. And again, the big part of it is we think you are talking to children about their sexuality in junior school. It's bad enough in senior school, but in junior schools, you should not be talking to children about sex and making them think, what sort of sex am I? Could I be homosexual? That shouldn't be an issue with them when they're so young. And I know that they say things like, well, girls getting their periods earlier at 9 and 10. Um, but I just feel on so many levels, it's so wrong the way we're um, basically sexualizing children.
This also confuses things, for girls who are in primary school age and who are getting an early puberty. It's not going to make things clearer having somebody, try and teach you about that who can't acknowledge the existence of biological sex. For other listeners who are sort of thinking, I'd like to check what's going on in my local school. How do you find this information? You mentioned social media, you've mentioned FOIs. Do you look at multiple different sources to sort of figure out what's going on in a school, or what's your usual protocol?
Don't work alone because there are other groups we work with as well, like Parents for Education, Safe Schools Alliance, Transgender Trend. They all have really great letters as well. So, you can use them too. We have letters up on that we can give you as a template. FOIs we can help you with. You really need to find, I would say, getting the information first is the important thing before you start tackling it. What do you think, Jenny? Did you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the first stop is just to go onto the school website and have a look at the policies that they've got. If there's any kind of transgender policy, it's a massive red flag for a start, but there quite often isn't. So you have to dig a bit deeper. If you go into the equality policy, a lot of them have actually been changed. So they don't list the protected characteristics as they appear in the Equality Act. They have swapped it out so it says gender instead of sex, or it says something like sex, including gender identity, or something.
Yeah, which is definitely Stonewall, isn't it? That's where we say they've been stonewalled. Rainbow awards, if your school's got a rainbow award, you definitely have had teachers, you will have had one teacher and one governor who've been to the LGBT group, their local LGBT group, for training in the rainbow. And then they have to go back to the school and train the other teachers and the other governors in the cult of the rainbow, if you like. So that's a really bad sign. They would often, as a reference, we've got schools that reference mermaids still and Stonewall, so they'll have it in their policy, like their safeguarding policy down at the very end. If you have any concerns about your child, you can being trans, you can contact Stonewall or mermaids, which is like the worst possible thing that they could do. Um, Uniform, you can check the uniform policy. Sometimes the uniform policy will say children can dress however they feel identify, um, and wear the uniform they identify with. You think, right, okay, so that's something there.
The bullying policy is obviously a big one as well, where misgendering is classed as bullying and things. So, yeah, there's lots of red flags you can find just on a school website. Um, if it all looks okay on the school website, then sometimes on the social media you'll see things about posting about Trans Day of Remembrance or Pride Month or something. There's quite often, I think, external groups that we've got on our big list of these providers. They range from PHSE providers like Jigsaw, which people trust, but it's so secretive, we just don't know what they're teaching anymore, to full on trans charities like Intercom or Stonewall that are actually doing the Rainbow Award and the Rainbow lunchtime clubs and stuff.
Yeah, I would say that's our big concern. That if they've got a lunchtime club, it'll be usually run by a teacher, or they trust the company itself, like Intercom or whatever, or no outsiders or Space Youth will go in and set it up. Because it's a lunchtime club, it doesn't have to have any rules, it doesn't have to have any registration, no records kept of who goes or what they talk about. So you can imagine on a Wednesday afternoon, you're the kid that doesn't fit in at school, maybe you're being bullied. You can go there, you can just turn up. Your parents don't have to be told, no notification that you're going or that you want to go or get permission from the parents. So you can just turn up there and talk to a whole load of kids that also want to talk about being trans or non-binary or supposedly gay. But we've seen the reports, the groups are now cutting back on the reporting. We've seen their business reports saying that they mention trans and questioning children, and we believe the questioning children are the gay children who really don't want to say they're gay because it's just not cool. So it's much better to be questioning or non-binary or trans than to actually say, oh, I think I'm a lesbian or I think I'm a homosexual. But even so, it's 11, depending on your school, it could be 11 till 18. I mean, most schools finish at 16 and they go on to college. But, imagine an 11-year-old with a 16-year-old talking about feelings of, sexuality, really. It's just crazy, absolutely crazy. And they get loads of money. They get money to do this. The school pays them to go in. So the school pays 2 to 5 thousand a year to educate their staff to get these groups in. I mean, why? That's money that's just wasted. on this. It's just totally unnecessary. We don't have lunch. You don't see lunchtime things. We've asked them, are you doing any other lunchtime clubs? Because you think they'd have maybe, a computer lunchtime club or a dancing lunchtime club or whatever. But they don't. They just don't. They just do mainly. They don't have a lunchtime club for disabled kids or autistic kids. Just the LGBTQ. And the big concern is they're moving. They're a movable object. I believe they're a parasite anyway, parasiting onto the LGB and the trans and the queer side of it and the IA plus, whatever that is. And they're moving and changing and they're going into mental health, these groups. So a lot of them are expanding into mental health. We've got the recent one we had through 101 was an AI group for mental health, which we haven't started researching yet. But basically, if the teacher's worried about a child, they'll get them to speak on a computer program like this and answer some questions with the computer AI program, which will then diagnose if they need further psychiatric help, which will then lead them to the team that will be being supplied by another group, which will then charge their council money, saying, oh, we've got 10 children in this school that have been diagnosed as depressed and we need money so we can go on in and speak to these children. Well, they'll speak to them online like this.
And it's so concerning what you say about, the schools doing this in secrecy or encouraging children to be in cahoots with them or to keep a secret with them. I did a social work type degree, and one of the biggest red flags that we were taught when looking for abuse with children was that somebody had encouraged them to start keeping secrets from their parents, even small innocuous things, because it's often a step towards grooming to sort of build that practice in of like, you don't tell your parents about this, or we will have it as our secret, they don't need to know. Starts with buying you an ice cream at the park after school and can lead to some very dark places. And it's concerning that schools are doing this because it normalizes it to children in a way.
Yeah, school, it starts with making cookies at lunchtime and then ends up in some very, very dark things.
We've had children that have been trans by the school. We've got evidence of that, which was in our original Telegraph article. One of the mums spoke there, where the school had trans their daughter for 2 years without telling them. Now, that's a massive secret.
Gosh. And I mean, does irreparable damage to their relationship with their parents, because
they never see it. You see, they wave them goodbye at 16 and think, oh, we've done a great job there. And, they were trans and we've helped them, supported them. And the destruction that this causes within a family, it just goes on. It's generational, especially if they've been taking drugs or had surgery and then maybe go on and have children of their own, if they can, or they're sterile. It's just, well, as you know.
Yeah, well, it's the cult tactics, isn't it? Is this whole you cut off your family, you go no contact. If they don't agree with you or go along with your new identity, then it's because they don't love you, and actually your trans family is who loves you, and it's so sinister, but it's so recognizable as a cult. I can't get my head around how schools don't see it.
No, it is concerning. I think we pass back to Jane now. She wants to talk to you about the Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah, you've touched on so much to do. And I'm thinking, do you think the Supreme Court ruling has helped the future of what you need to do? Do you think, what do you think is going to happen post Supreme Court ruling?
Well, it's given us extra ammunition, hasn't it, Jenny? You can say that. So we're starting to look again at our old projects that sort of ground to a halt of disagreement, that we can actually go back, because we said to them then, you should not be having boys in girls' toilets because it's against the law. And they were denying it. So now we can say, now you see the Supreme Court ruling that actually backs up all we've been telling you. What have you done about your toilets? Because again, we sent all that to them. So now it's good opportunities for us to go back and see, did they change the toilets back? We know one school did. Parent Power, possibly. They put signs on of the unisex sign, which is like a circle and a cross and an arrow and a plus coming out the top or whatever, on all their toilets. I think that lasted for a month. And then they were all back to boys and girls again. So that was very interesting. And another school, exactly the same thing happened. the teacher announced when the children went back to school, it's all unisex toilets now, and I think that lasted 2 weeks because it's parent power again, and kids come home and kids don't like it either. Why do boys want girls in their toilets any more than girls don't want boys in their toilets? It's crazy. So I think it's clarified it for us. I think a lot of them have dug their heels in, but it's also quite embarrassing the way a lot of them have dug their heels in. I think that at NEU, I mean, honestly, that the teaching union, you almost wanted to just say, I'm embarrassed, I just feel really embarrassed for you as a professional body. And this is how you decided to accept a Supreme Court ruling. So it opens it up to us to go back to councils.
I love the way you're saying it opens up to us. So been given an opportunity when in reality you are a dozen people across the country. You're such an army. Wow. You've got a fighting force, haven't you, though? Fighting spirit, tenacious, I think.
Yeah, we've grown in numbers quite a lot over the last 6 months or so. When people contact us, if we think they've got something to offer, we just team up. So I do think the Supreme Court ruling, as well as, backing up the situation with single-sex spaces and stuff, it essentially destroys the narrative that you can change your sex in any meaningful way. I think it's going to eventually lead to the repeal of the GRA because I think it's shown the inconsistencies with women's rights. When men are allowed to identify as women, everything falls apart. So I definitely think it's a step in the right direction, but we still have a lot to do.
I think the big thing for me was the fact it was obviously so much about toilets. I couldn't believe the response of men. They couldn't go in women's toilets anymore. I thought, it is just about wanting to go in our toilets and changing rooms. There's nothing more to it than that. It's just unbelievable. It was just going on and on and on.
People will listen to this and they will want to help. What can they do to help? What can they do to promote what you do and maybe to get involved?
Welcome to contact us through X or email and join in. We have quite a lot of different projects, from looking into the external organisations that are going into schools to looking at the COV, the RSE provision. There's a lot of projects that people can get involved in depending on what might be going on in their own areas. So have a look at what's going on in your local schools, and don't be afraid to make some noise about it and make other parents aware. Because I think, like we've said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you see the harm, you need to do something about it. So I think all we need to do is make more and more parents aware. So just try and be brave enough to talk to other parents and make noise at the school.
Yeah, it's quite easy sometimes to pick it up. You can find out, have they got a lunchtime group going on? And in which case, which group is it that they've got going in? And then we can give them information on that group. If you just Google the group, you'll find loads of stuff about them. You could pull the school policy of your school. You could send an FOI and you could ask them, what are you doing for Pride Month?
Yeah. Emailing MPs is always worth it as well. If you do find that there's some schools that are really endangering kids in your local area, let your MP know. I mean, we can't expect them all to do something about it, but it's still worth sending that email.
Yes, and the council, we're doing a lot of work now in the councils. We managed to get them to remove a lot of trans ideology postings on their website. So they had just a page up saying, if you think your child is trans, with some really outdated links to Stonewall, to mermaids, reports about how it's wonderful to have a trans child in your school. Do you remember that paper, newspaper article? We were just shocked, and we brought it up to them, and it actually just silently disappeared. And that's how you know you're making a difference. Just expose it to the light, one person at a time. Even if it's one person, it's worth it, because they will talk to another person. So you might think, I'd love to tell all the teachers in this school, all the people in this school, but I'm just going to tell, this person who's in the same class and ask them what they think about it. Be prepared to meet someone who thinks this is all fine. I mean, I did have a woman. I was at the school because this is the one where the little girl's constipated, and she said, "Can I ask what you're doing here?" I said, "Well, we're worried about the boys and girls sharing toilets, and we've got a little girl who's got chronic constipation." And I said, and she had a girl. She just dropped a girl off. We don't do it in front of the children. We wait till the children are in, or we see them before the children come out. And her daughter was just this lovely little pretty bronze thing. She was still about 8 years old, skipping into school. And I said, "You've had a daughter." I said, "Does it concern you that she shares her boys with toilets?" She said, "No, absolutely not." She said, "I said absolutely fine that she goes learns that boys and girls can share everything." And you think, well, exactly. What do you say to that? So if you get something like that, don't worry, everybody. I've got somebody like that, and even I have been lost for words.
I mean, I take my hat off to you. You're an inspiration. You've done so much.
Yeah, we all push each other on, don't we? One of us is always like tired, and the other one's like, "Come on, we can do this letter." We play games, don't we? "I'm really busy. Could you just do a letter for me for this?"
Yeah, we come to our final question, which is the same in every episode, and that is, do you have a woman of the moment or a voice that you'd like to draw attention to and uplift?
I think mine would be Rachel Matthews. She used to do the Council Watch Colchester YouTube channel. I think she's brilliantly brave. She's got a really, really good book that I'm listening to at the moment. The Accidental Activist. She, it's not so much the gender stuff that she deals with. She's mostly focusing on like the net zero side of things, but it's all about taking responsibility for what's going on in your local area and doing what you can to change it. And the councils have a lot more power than people realise. And I think particularly like the county councils, which have power for education and children in care, I think is an area we need to focus on. So yeah, I think she's my inspiration. She's done so much and her book is amazing. So
Perfect, great suggestion. And Cathy?
At Stotely. She's on Twitter at Stotely. She's what I call the FOI queen. She can do the most fantastic FOIs, and she's a great organizer. And she just like will drop in to a meeting. So when you're really brainstorming and working around with loads of people trying to come up with ideas, and Ermin will hear about it through the grapevine. She knows everybody and knows everything that's going on. And she'll just come in and she'll just say, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" And she'll suddenly direct you where you want to go. And then she'll slip away again. And that's it. She's done her bit. She's kickstarted us.
she's like our fairy godmother sometimes, isn't she?
Yes, like our fairy godmother. So she does really great posts. She's also very good at picking up posts that are relevant to us. So she'll often drop me a post that she's seen on something that's relevant to what the work we're doing or something that we need to look at or maybe write to. So like I say, I would probably say Ermin. I have loads. I have loads. But I could do, if you can do this every week and we'll have a woman of the week. Get them all in.
What a great suggestion. Well, thank you both so much for speaking to us and thank you for sharing your women of the moment. This has been really eye-opening and, quite unexpected, particularly the state of C of E schools. So, I mean, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure our listeners will have really appreciated it, and best of luck with your endeavours.
Thank you ever so much for having us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please do like, comment, share, all that good stuff to help spread the word. And we hope to see you in the next episode.